In the last section, we introduced the concept of state. State is used to record and react to user interactions. There's two big rules that we want to always remember about state. First off, we only ever update our state by calling this.setState and then passing an object with the property that we want to update. Secondly, whenever we update our state, it causes our component to re-render. This is how we make changes in our information and in our view pop up on the screen of our mobile device. So back on topic here. At the end of the last section, we kind of left it at a funny place. We have our new date and we're subtracting from it our start time, which is also always new date. So in effect, time elapsed right now is always going to be 0. We're going to add a little bit of code here to make this existing code make a little bit more sense. First, we need a little bit more white space here, so I'm going to delete the existing comment. Next, we're going to wrap our setState call inside of an anonymous fat arrow function. So remember, fat arrow functions, we do open parens, our fat arrow, and then whenever we have a multi-line function, we're going to wrap it with curly braces. And then we will indent everything inside. Okay, so remember, this is basically pretty close to writing something that looks like this. It's just a different way of writing function. There is an additional difference here, and that is the value of this in each of them, but we'll talk more about that in a later section. Okay, so now that we've wrapped our function here, we're going to call setInterval, and then we're going to add an open paren and close paren. So be very careful with the parentheses. There's a lot of them floating around here. After we close our function call with a curly brace here, we'll put comma 30. So basically setInterval here has two arguments, the function and then 30. If you've never used setInterval before, don't sweat it. It's a native JavaScript function, and all it does is it takes some function that we pass it and a number. The number right here represents milliseconds. And what happens is every X number of milliseconds, in this case 30, setInterval will run the function we provided to it. So you can now imagine that whenever a user taps on the screen here, we're going to start executing this function every 30 milliseconds. And what that means is we only take our start time once, but our new date is going to be getting triggered all the time. And that's how we're going to get our time elapsed. So new date is always going to be running constantly, right? Because our setInterval is running once every 30 milliseconds. So this new date is going to be changing all the time, but start time is always going to stay the same. It's always going to be the time at which the user tapped the button. So time elapsed is really how we're going to track what the value of our timer up at the top should be. Okay, so enough about this setInterval here. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then we need to do one more thing. We need to actually make sure that our time elapse gets rendered into the page. So we're going to add a curly brace in place of the existing text, the default 000, and instead we're going to reference this.state.time elapsed. Cool. So let's save, refresh the simulator. Refresh the simulator. There we go. And now you'll notice that first off, we don't have the default value there anymore. Time elapsed right now, our this.state.time elapsed is currently null because we only just rendered our component and our time elapsed hasn't changed yet. So let's go ahead and click start, and sure enough, just what we wanted. So the timer's kicking off here, and what it's showing us is milliseconds, the number of milliseconds since we pressed the start button. The important thing here is that our component is updating constantly, right? There's really not a tremendous amount of magic here. There's no introspection. Nothing is saying, oh, this variable changed, I need to update. It is solely by the fact that we're calling this.setState that we're getting this re-render here. If we wanted to, we can slow this down significantly. Let's do this once every 1,000 milliseconds, so basically once every second. I'll go ahead and refresh, and then you can now see once every second this is updating here. Cool. Let's flip it back to 30, refresh, and let it go. All right, so we have our milliseconds, which is good. It's updating, which is good, but it's not quite looking like the format we want, right? We don't want to show the user some millisecond value. We want to show them a nicely formatted time. So I'm talking like the value that we had before, something like minutes, seconds, dot, milliseconds, 98 milliseconds. So rather than parsing our time elapsed by hand, we're going to make use of another little NPM package to help us out with time. And in the same way that we used moment.js in our last app to help us out with time. And we're going to install it the same way that we installed Moment. So over in our terminal, we're going to install it as an NPM package. I'm going to close our existing NPM start process right here by hitting Control-C. And then we're going to install our new NPM package called npm install --save. And the name of it is minutes, seconds, milliseconds. So we'll let this go ahead and do its thing. And then we'll run npm start to kick our packager back up. Cool. Now remember, anytime we install an npm package, we need to make sure that we include it into our document here, into our component, our file. So at the top, we'll add var format time equals require, and then we're going to require in the package we just installed, minutes, seconds, milliseconds. Now, convention is really to name the whatever we require in after the name of the package, but I don't really want to have a variable floating around called minutes, second, milliseconds. So instead, we're just going to call it format time because that's really just what it does. Okay, so again, the purpose of that format time function is to just format our milliseconds into a usable time. So we'll just call format time, and we'll pass it the millisecond value. And format time is just going to return a string that's going to be nicely formatted for us. So let's go ahead, refresh. You'll see that it handles the null case really well. So to start, this .state.timeelapsed is null, and it went ahead and formatted it as just 000 for us. So let's go ahead and click start. And sure enough, this is looking pretty darn good. We've got our seconds counting up here, and our milliseconds are churning by just as well. And when this goes up to a minute, hopefully it will roll over to 1 minute for us as well. So this is looking fantastic. Let's continue in the next section.